Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A straightforward topic. Let's go. What's the most eerie thing that's ever happened to you? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I guess this is a small world kind of thing rather than truly paranormal, but I was an ER tech, and while restraining an unruly drunk patient, he spat in my face, swung at me, and threatened to kill my family. He got a continuance on charges, so it was an ongoing case. One day, about 8 months later, I got on the train and was buried in my phone. I heard behind me, "Thank you for saving my life." I looked behind, and it was him. He apologized profusely, told me he was sober, and scribbled a free meal coupon on a page of his Sudoku book for a restaurant he had found work at. I dropped the charges. I hope he's still doing well. I was a manager of a computer repair for a retailer a couple of years ago. We had client's computer in the back running various malware and virus scan. I was doing morning paperwork in the back near the computer. This PC had its screensaver on, displaying random photos of my pictures folder, various family members, children's birthday parties, the usual stuff. Then from the corner of my eye, I swear to God I saw a picture of a woman from the shoulders up with her throat cut. As soon as I realized what I was making out, I directed my full attention, and it was back to photos of a car show. As the day went on, I thought nothing of it, and proceeded to continue my work until I was bringing another customer's PC to the back to work on, and again from my peripheral, I could have sworn I saw a bloody body in a bound trunk of a car. At that moment I began to freak out. I grabbed one of my employees, explained to him the situation. We then sat there for 10 minutes and watched the screensaver. It's against company policy to search through the client's personal files without absolute just cause. We then proceeded to see a photo of two bodies in a shallow grave out in the woods, and another photo of a severed hand in the kitchen drawer. I then went and got the general manager and informed him of the situation and had him view the screensaver. We then felt it would be in everyone's best interest to contact law enforcement. In about 15 minutes later, owner of the company and the computer and another gentleman show up and proceed to tell him that his computer is not ready and it will be a while. He then informs me that he is called there because someone reported there was some photographs of a grisly murder that we had found. I showed him his computer, and then his partner then begins to laugh at him. Apparently, he went against police policy and took some photos of his work home with him, and I never noticed his work photos were being used as a screensaver. TLDR. A detective unknowingly brings me a computer filled with gory homicide pictures that get mixed in with the screensavers. I soil myself thinking I'm dealing with a murderer. Call the cops, and detective returns to investigate his own computer. The day after my dad died, I had laid down and took a long nap. I was exhausted from the visitors and the questions and the reminders that he was gone, so I just wanted to escape for a while. During the nap, I dreamt a strange dream. I was back in the hospital again, and I saw my dad surrounded by doctors and hooked to all kinds of wires and IVs. I cried and told them to leave him alone and that he had suffered enough, but my dad told me not to cry, and it was then that I noticed they were actually removing the wires and IVs from him. He stood up, which was something he hadn't done in a long time, and asked me to walk with him. He was wearing a long white robe, and together we walked through a beautiful place next to a stream. I was telling him about how we had seen the Avengers recently, and how his favorite superhero, the Hulk, had been in it. I laughed as I explained the scene where Hulk slams Loki around like a rag doll and said, "Oh my God, that would have been your favorite part. You would have died laughing." My dad said, "Poor choice of words," but he was smiling. I said, "Yeah, true, sorry, Dad." His smile went away, and then he looked at me seriously and said, "It's all right. I didn't really want to die." And then I woke up. I had tears streaming down my face, and to this day, I've never had another dream like that again. I've always been skeptical of the unknown, but sometimes I wonder if he was saying goodbye to me in the only way he could. I still miss him every day of my life. If I could have just one more dream with him, I'd be so happy. I was driving home per usual and got this random unwavering feeling that my house had been broken into. I kind of laughed and said, "Please don't let my house have actually been broken into," out loud as I turned the corner onto my street. The first thing I noticed when I pulled up to the house were the blinds on my bedroom window. They were yanked around and twisted up. Some guy that lives across the street turned out to have been stalking me and decided to climb through my bedroom window. He took nothing valuable, just some weird personal items. It was terrifying to walk in and see my things rummaged through. It was even scarier when I talked with a neighbor, and they admitted that multiple people in the neighborhood had seen it happen, but they were all too scared of old dude to say anything. The weirdest part of it all, and I mean, this guy took some creepy personal things, is that nagging feeling I had before I found the remnants of the break-in. I swear I knew before I knew, and that was such an eerie feeling. This happened last year. I was having a recurring dream where I was in the woods at night. I noticed a campfire in the distance. Whoever was sitting at the fire notices me and yells out, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" and starts moving towards me until I wake up. Late last summer, I decided to go out in the woods for a hike. Once I got out there, I needed to pee. I hopped off the trail to get closer to the creek so I could take care of business and not worry about anyone walking up on me. As I approached the creek, I see a hidden shelter and a man setting up a campfire. When he noticed me, he said, "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Nothing else happened. I apologized and went on my way. It was the only time in my life that I had dreams of an event before it happened. I was pretty shook at the time. As a teen in the late 70s, my friend group used to enjoy marijuana and beer. On one of those rare weekends where a friend's parents leaves the house for a weekend, we were enjoying a rare treat of partying in comfort in the living room. We ran out of beer and snacks. My three companions went to the store around sundown. While alone in a dimly lit house, the phone rang. When I answered, a voice said in a slow, quiet whisper, "It's all your fault." What ran through my brain in an instant was how boring my life had been to this point, and this was probably the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me. Like something you see on TV or in the movies. And in a flash, my excitement blurted out as, "Far out," and they hung up. I once met this same set of twins in the same day, one after the other, one at a library and then another at the mall. My ex and I lived in a remote part of northern Nevada. The house was literally in the middle of a field, and our neighbors were far away. He worked nights, and I never liked how dark and quiet it was. On a night he was working, I fell asleep and had a dream about him. In the dream, he was standing on the edge of a cliff like the Grand Canyon, looking out at the view. I tried many times to get his attention, but he wouldn't acknowledge me. He was just staring straight ahead. After ignoring me for a while, he abruptly turned to me and grabbed the outside of my arms firmly. His face looked panicked and he said, "Naeem, there's somebody in the house." Like the movies, my eyes shot open and I woke up with my blood running cold. I lay in bed silently, listening for any sound. I was even more terrified when the dog woke up almost immediately, started barking and ran out of his dog door into the yard. What did he hear? I never saw or heard anything out of place. I couldn't see anything outside in the dark. The dog came back in and fell asleep. I stayed up the rest of the night, totally creeped out. I had one of those dreams that you couldn't wake up from. I knew I was asleep, and I was aware, but I couldn't wake up. I was absolutely terrified, thinking that I was stuck in like a coma or something. I had a gun with me for some reason, and as the terror of not being able to wake up grew, I for some reason had a thought and belief that if I killed myself in the dream, I would die in real life, and that was a better alternative than being in a coma. So I brought the gun to my head and pulled the trigger. I physically felt pain in my temple and heard the shot. I woke up right afterwards. One time, my husband and I were lying in bed and the bottom drawer of his nightstand slammed shut. There was no logical explanation for why that happened, and we still don't understand to this day. Years ago, I worked the late shift at a hospital, 4 p.m. to midnight. My nightly drive home led me through back roads of fields and woods, which often had low-hanging fog, particularly in early spring. I lived in a small town that has a lot of Civil War history. Ghost stories were so popular in that area, historians would do moonlight ghost walks, where they searched for signs of restless spirits roaming the battlefield. The urban legend was that in a war that pitted brother against brother, those soldiers who were killed by family became souls that were never at rest. I never bought into it, but one night, under particularly dense fog, did scare the ever-living crap out of me. At around 1 a.m., I sped through curves and hills. I saw the outline of two figures walking along the side of the road. The closer I got, the more I slowed down, and as I didn't want to hit them or anything. By the time I passed them, I was going probably 10 miles per hour. First, I noticed their weirdly shaped hats, then the buttons on their jackets glimmered in my headlights. I swear to God, there were two Civil War soldiers walking in the fog and the moonlight. I could not breathe. The taller one, thin and gangly, looked up at my car and put his hand towards me. I hit the gas so hard, my transmission could barely keep up. I sped off into the night. When I finally caught my breath, screamed several expletives. As I rounded the curve, I saw a small car, Geo Metro, pulled over with lights flashing. Its hood was up and steam was coming from the engine. A man in Civil War garb stood close by with his hands on his hips. Damn reenactors were in town for some event and had car problems. To this day, I have no clue why they were out so late. About scared me to death. I was walking to a college class and felt as if I'd suddenly stepped outside of my body and was watching myself move around like a puppeteer. It lasted for about 10 minutes while I called a parent to ground myself to reality. Happened again this week for a smaller amount of time. I'm guessing it was some kind of stress-induced disassociation episode since it was midterm season and my first semester away from home. When I was like 13 to 14 years old, some older boys threw rocks from a demolition site at me and my friend. One rock hit me in the face and knocked me down. I started bleeding profusely on the sidewalk and my friend was freaking out. We did not have cell phones since it was the 1990s and weren't near a payphone. An older man in his 50s or 60s stopped at a pickup truck and asked us to get in. My friend was like, "Oh my God," but I said, "No, let's get in, it's fine." This older man felt really trustworthy, but I didn't know why. My friend got in with me, and he drove us straight to the hospital. The hospital took his name, my friend's, and mine when we got to the ER, and the man peaced out. I had problems from that injury for 2 to 3 years, but I'm fine now, other than a small dent in my skull. My mom told me I should look him up in the phone book and call to thank him. There was exactly one name that matched his. It was an unusual name. I called it. The woman who picked up told me he had died 6 months earlier, but his physical description matched what both my friend and I recalled. I was able to look up his obituary, and the photo matched his appearance. It was definitely eerie, and to this day I don't really have any explanation for it. You know, the cynical part of me wants to say that I'm sure there's a logical explanation for that story, but I mean, if it happened as is, that's pretty cool and wild and weird at the same time. Nice. A few years ago, I was on holiday in Malta with my family. My parents are Maltese, and I have a ton of cousins and family living there. One of my cousins' fathers had passed away a few years before this, and I'd known him fairly well. On this day, while I was on holiday, we were just outside the walls of Valletta, walking on a road, and my wife and I started mentioning we needed to look for a way to cross. We were just walking normally and not standing on the edge of the road or making any sign that we wanted to cross. Suddenly a Mini Cooper appears out of nowhere, slams to a halt where I am. The driver leans across and tells me not to cross the road where I am. That's too dangerous, and points to a spot where I should cross, and he drives off. The driver was an exact resemblance of my cousin's father, wearing exactly the same clothes, shorts and a white singlet he used to habitually wear, and driving exactly the same car he used to when alive, and the same color. The thing is, he spoke to me in English when the default should have been Maltese. It's like he knew I spoke English when there was nothing we could have marked with our own as a foreigner. I can't explain how he knew that I was intending to cross the road, but am convinced he appeared to save me from getting hit. I grew up in a two-family house. Me, my parents and siblings living on one side, my grandmother on the other side. You were able to access my grandmother's side through a single door in the house. Once she passed away, I slowly took over her side since I was in high school and wanted my own space. One night I was walking to my room at the end of the hallway. There was a small mirror on the wall at the end. It was pretty dark, but I was still able to see. Right before I entered my room, I had looked up into the mirror and saw my grandmother standing behind me. So terrifying since this was around 3 a.m. I had to leave the house and stay with my girlfriend. One of my favorite aunts died at 94, leaving my elderly dad a much-needed sum of money for his care. He had been recently IOU conned out of his entire savings, while also left in deep debt by a man from a neighboring county, and I was working with the DA from 1,200 miles away to build a case against him, all of which was unknown to my aunt upon her death. I had power of attorney from my dad by then, and he was at the bank on a Saturday morning to collect the inheritance check. Myself and the manager were the only people there, so she directed me to the only desk in the lobby rather than her work office. After sharing with her the circumstances that had brought me there and finalizing the paperwork, she left to process a cashier's check in another area. Before putting away my aunt's death certificate, I placed my palm on it, whispering a prayer of gratitude to her for generously providing for my dad. At that moment, out of the corner of my left eye, I saw movement. A coin was rolling across the carpet floor and spun to a stop 4 feet to my direct left. Stunned, I got up and retrieved it, looking around for the source. It came from the direction of the floor to ceiling lobby window, brightly lit by sun. No one was around inside or out. I had goosebumps. When the manager came back, I told her what had just happened, showed her the penny, and asked if she had any possible explanation. She told me no change was kept in that area of the bank. It had been cleaned the night before, and I was the only customer so far. I half-jokingly said, "It's definitely my aunt then," letting me know it's going to be okay. The manager came around the desk and gave me a heartfelt hug. The con man was successfully convicted for fraud, elder abuse, etc., and sent to prison with a max sentence. I was able to ensure my dad was debt-free, comfortable, cared for, and safe until his peaceful death. I carry that penny with me to this day. I've had several eerie encounters in my life, but I'd like to lighten the post with one of the more positive ones I've experienced. We had a farm, and I was having a very bad day. The goats had gotten out, my schedule was off, I had to drive an hour each way to get groceries, and lots of things I needed were out of stock. It was just one thing after another, and I was just not having it. Our fridge wasn't leveled, so whenever I put groceries away, I had to prop it open with a shoe or the door would close. But you know how people get when they're frustrated and pissy? I didn't want to get the shoe to prop the fridge open, so the fridge door kept closing on me, and I was just getting increasingly angry. Then, for no apparent reason at all, the door gently opened wide and stayed open. I finished putting the groceries away and stepped back. The door gently closed. I said, "Thank you," out loud, just in case, and went on with my day. This was a few years ago in my early 20s. Hallucinated from the lack of sleep one night. I was slowly falling asleep but had an odd feeling. I turned on my bedroom light and looked up at the corner of the bedroom ceiling. Someone with long black hair and rotting skin crawled toward me at a horrifying speed for a split second, then in the blink of an eye, gone. Ended up staying awake with the light on, then finally sleeping a bit when the morning sun rose. Another creepy thing to happen, which had caused me to cover my ears with blankets and pillows until I heard of earplugs years later in my mid-20s to finally get some damn sleep. I was in my teen years and decided to take a nap one afternoon, slowly drifted to sleep, and vaguely kept hearing my name being whispered, until there was a very sharp, forced whisper of my name being called directly next to my ear. I got up awake fast, freaked me the hell out, and nobody was in my bedroom but myself. I'm still a very light sleeper, so it makes sleeping difficult without earplugs. Sleep paralysis. I've had 2 episodes in my life, but the first one will stick with me forever. My bed was in a corner of my room. My closet was in the opposite corner, no door on the closet, and it was stacked with a ton of junk, community storage for the household as I never used it. I wake up lying on my back with the door in the line of sight. I can see that it's full, but I can also see a hand slide out and grip the door frame, pale and feminine, followed by the slowly emerging frame of a very tall woman clad in white Victorian-era dress. She was almost pretty, aside from something in her face that wasn't quite right. I couldn't tell you what it was, but I remember being uneasy about it. For a while, probably about 15 minutes, she just stood there talking to herself. I wasn't able to make out anything she said, but that's when the panic set in. I realized I couldn't move or speak, couldn't look away, and I had no idea what was happening, as I felt fully awake. Then she stopped, looked me in the eye and smiled, and the corners of her mouth pulled back to her ears. Terrifying. She started to approach and slowly opened her mouth so wide her chin was touching where I'd estimate the bottom of her ribcage sat. It wasn't long before I could smell her rotten breath, and she began to crawl on top of me. The entire time, she was letting out this awful, multi-toned moan that sounded like 5 voices at once, all distorted. I could feel her weight resting on my chest. I couldn't breathe or scream as she inched closer. She put my entire head in her mouth, and I fully woke up when all I could see was darkness. I still get a bit panicky remembering that one. It felt so real. 2 stand out in my life. The first was when I was in the military and stationed in a place called South Camp 7 on the Sinai Peninsula. Pulling guard duty one night and saw a meteor crasher land in the Red Sea. Rare but normal, but it was eerie nonetheless. Second, years later, sitting in a cigar bar one afternoon, only a couple of us in the place. The entry door opens by itself. Nobody anywhere around it. It stayed open for about 5 seconds and then closed. The other guy saw it as well. We looked at each other in the what the expression. The door was one of those glass doors with an aluminum frame, which meant you could clearly see anyone coming in. We walked outside and looked around. Nobody. We stood there for several minutes trying to figure it out and discussed the possibility of wind blowing it open. The problem was there was no wind. We never did figure it out. I was over at my parents' house and watering their plants this winter when they were on vacation. I go to my car and put it in reverse, and this old man walking on the pavement and I make eye contact. He smiles at me and I smile back, and then I'm out on the way and putting it in forward and going to drive away, and I still look at this old man. But then when I look forward and start driving away, he's absolutely gone. I look in all the mirrors and turn my neck and he's nowhere to be seen, just gone. About 10 years ago, my wife and I were watching Paranormal Activity on TV. It was late at night. As soon as the final scene, terrifying, was over and the credits started rolling, we heard a large dog barking outside our front door. We lived in an isolated house in the country, had been in the house for years, and had never heard any dogs nearby. I ran upstairs and opened the door. No dog, nothing, dead quiet. My wife immediately swore off horror movies and hasn't watched one since.